right here, like that. All right. Everyone good? You got through the parking situation. It was less than optimal. I apologize for that. Thank you all for coming to our little shindig here about nonprofit practices and laws, all that exciting stuff. This thing doesn't come off. All right, so I'm Alex Gertsburg. My law firm, our law firm is the Gertsburg Law Firm. And we're putting this presentation on for lots of reasons. One is because we love nonprofits. You're going to hear from two of our best attorneys, Mark Turner and Nate Haskell. They do a lot of nonprofit work, and anything from litigation to transactions, forming nonprofits, helping them with employment issues, contract issues, all that fun stuff. And you're going to hear from a pretty star-studded group of panelists here. Patrick Kearns from the Refugee Response, Elizabeth Viduris, whose name I'm sure I'm butchering, from BVU, Anne-Marie Grassi from Open Doors, Janice Small from Janice Small Associates, and Jean Polster from Neighborhood Family Practice are going to be our panelists today. And we're going to try to squeeze like 40 different things into the next 2.5 hours. A couple of housekeeping items. First, we are really privileged to have Edwin's here. Anyone eaten at Edwin's before? It's the best, right? It's the best. French food. It's a nonprofit. It has this amazing business model. They bring formerly incarcerated folks into their organization. They help teach them business skills, life skills, and the food is just amazing. So you're going to get to eat their food during a lunch break, but if you get really hungry, don't be shy. Go out there, get some food, bring it back, and snack all you want. And we're going to bring up someone from Edwin's to introduce the cuisine shortly. So here's the agenda. Okay? So after I stop talking, which will be momentarily, I promise, Nate Haskell is going to come up and he's going to talk about crowdfunding. Has anyone ever tried crowdfunding here? All right, we've got some hands. All right. Does everyone know what crowdfunding is? All right. By the time you leave here, if you haven't tried it, you're going to want to. And if you have, you're going to learn how to do it better. And we've done it. We've done it at the law firm, and I'm going to walk you through how we did it. And it is probably one of the fastest growing ways to raise funds for any organization, for-profit or nonprofit. So one of the things, sort of the philosophies of our law firm is that we're a business law firm, and what we know is that behind every legal issue, there's a business person. And they deal with things way broader than just legal issues. And so what we try to do with our clients is help address not just the specific legal issue that they come to us to address, but the business issue behind it. So one thing that we know that you guys all deal with every day is raising money. And so crowdfunding is a great way to do that. And so you're going to learn a lot about that today. And then Mark Turner is going to come up and talk about volunteer issues. Raise your hand if you've ever had a problem volunteer. Everyone's hand should be going up. All right, if your hand isn't up, then you're either too shy or you're gonna have a problem volunteer at some point. So Mark's gonna come up here and talk about some of the legal issues and some of the practical issues that you get when dealing with problem volunteers. And then we're gonna eat. And Tom Noby from Edwin's is gonna come up and tell you what you're eating and talk about his organization. And then while we're eating, we're going to try to pull this off. I don't know if we're going to be able to, but we're going to give it a shot. We're going to try to have a round table while we're eating. So the only rule is don't talk with your mouth full, right? But we're going to do a round table about social media. And really the goal there is to sort of cross-pollinate and see what social media efforts have worked for you guys, what hasn't worked for you guys. We do a lot with social media at the firm, so we can talk about it, but there's probably only so much that you want to hear from lawyers in one session. So we're going to talk about social media while we eat. And then, if we time it right, which I'm sure we won't, then sometime between 1 and 2, we're going to bring our panel up here to talk about strategic planning. So, I am going to do what lawyers are not known for doing. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to bring up Nate Haskell. So Nate, come on up, Nate. Nate is head of our corporate department. He is kind of a deal junkie. He loves doing deals, right? Mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling companies, any kind of transaction. He works a lot with nonprofits. Nate is one of the really the exemplars for the firm in the sense that he comes to the firm with both a big firm background and then an in-house counsel background. So Nate worked at Jones Day, I think the largest law firm in the world still, doing securities work and transactional work, and then smartened up and went in-house and went to work for First Energy, where he did securities work there. And then he smartened up some more and went to work for the Gertsburg law firm. So Nate is going to talk to you about crowdfunding, and here's Nate. Thanks, Nate. Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we have a little microphone issue they're going to work on. I don't know if Alex mentioned, I was a high school band director before I went to law school, so I don't need a microphone. I'm just fine talking like this for a couple minutes anyway. So I want to thank you all for coming as well. We spent a lot of time choosing the topics for today's seminar. We want to choose them very carefully to make them a blend of legal issues and business issues and things that are important to nonprofits. Because there can be just as much learning here, talking about business issues and getting folks like you together and talking to one another and sharing ideas as there are in us spouting off, legal answers to legal questions. So I hope you find the topics to be timely and helpful to you. I'm glad we have some people in the room who have done some crowdfunding because there are very few people in Cleveland who have. So please, during the seminar, if you have a question, if you have a comment, please raise your hand. If you have a thought on anything I'm saying up here, jump in and let us know what you're thinking or throw the question in. So, are you all set? Great. So, okay. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Great. So, put our first slide here. Turn it up. And crowdfunding, new frontier in fundraising. Maybe frontier is kind of a outdated word because crowdfunding has been pretty popular for the last 3-4 years. It's grown a lot, as we'll see in some statistics a little later on. Alex asked, if you knew what crowdfunding is, what is crowdfunding? There are many different types. So here are a couple definitions I pulled off the web from Cambridge and from CauseVox. Crowdfunding is the practice of getting a large number of people to each give a small amount of money in order to provide the finance for a business project, typically using the internet. Typically because you could crowdfund without the internet, although I don't really know who would do it these days. But the other keys there are a large number of people, small amounts of money. It's easier to crowdfund for a smaller or mid-sized project and get small amounts of money from a large group of people than it is to use crowdfunding for a really large, a capital campaign, operating fund, and be looking for larger amounts of money. Second thing here, peer-to-peer fundraising. Sort of a form of crowdfunding, or maybe some people would say it's different from crowdfunding. Peer-to-peer would mean that, well, anyone here done peer-to-peer? Okay, so Pam from Good Cause Creative in the back. Do you want to give your 20-second explanation of peer-to-peer?
The thing that separates peer-to-peer, I think, is that you are, crowdfunding is you have one large campaign that you're asking everyone to participate in, but when when you take the next step to do peer-to-peer, you're asking individual donors to kind of have their own mini campaign, where they are reaching out to their network and raising a certain amount of funds. You could ask 10 board members to each raise $1,000, and then you would get your $10,000 that you were trying to get. Or if it's just a larger crowdfunding campaign, you'd be saying, everybody we know, help us reach $10,000.
Sure. So, and I think the other big thing to note, I suppose, between crowdfunding and peer-to-peer is, I think crowdfunding, you're going to be using a platform like CrowdRise or one of the platforms you've probably seen advertised on TV. With peer-to-peer, you probably aren't using a platform. You could, but that's basically it. By the way, there's a handout in your folder. On the right side in the front should be the handout for this section of the presentation. It doesn't have everything that's on my PowerPoint slides, but it has some of the key things. If you want to take notes, go ahead and jot them down on there. Here's a list of the different types of crowdfunding. You've probably heard of some of these. Peer-to-peer lending is huge. That's for small businesses. Real estate's also huge. Those are probably the two biggest areas of crowdfunding. But the others are also pretty good size. Rewards-based, you're probably familiar with. Title III and Reg CF is something that's for the for-profit sector. That just went into effect in 2016. That could be a pretty big deal. That's for small businesses to raise capital, anything up to $1 million. Then personal cause, and then the one we're going to talk about the most, nonprofits. Here are some platforms that are geared toward helping nonprofits. It's important when you choose a platform that you pick a platform that does work with nonprofits and also that provides good services, support services for your campaign, because the platforms that focus on nonprofits, some of them do a really outstanding job of sort of walking you through, helping you along, especially if you're a smaller nonprofit that doesn't have a marketing department or doesn't have a huge staff. Some of those platforms they can be like gold for you to help you get through get through your campaign. Go ahead.
What if we're a 501c6? We're kind of sitting in the middle between charitable organization and not really for profit, but not really non-profit. I mean, we have some tax status that we don't understand how to think about in terms of this context.
Right. Honestly, I'd have to think about that. Honestly, I don't think that there's really a difference for you. A 501c6, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, is a trade association. So it's a type of nonprofit. It's very similar to a 501c3. I think the difference with a trade association is in terms of anyone familiar with unrelated business income tax and private inurement. If you've been in a nonprofit for a while, you're familiar with those legal doctrines. Those will make it more restrictive what types of things you can do. But honestly, beyond that, I would be really surprised if there's a platform that says, oh, you're a C6, we're not going to help you. I would bet some of the platforms, if you ask them, if you told them we're a C6, the person on the phone would probably say, what are you talking about? What's a C6? Seriously.
There's no legal implications of us getting money and not being allowed to spend it.
Right. Well, and it's what you're raising money for, and then what your activities are. So it's really things that I don't think crowdfunding itself imposes any additional restrictions on you. So no problem at all. Why crowdfund? Grow your support base. Attract corporate sponsors. Attracting corporate sponsors is not easy to do. It's not like you can just jump on one of these platforms and poof, some huge company is going to find you. You can get lucky. Our law firm had a campaign for our essay contest. We have an essay contest for on the east side. A lot of the schools on the east side are involved. The essay contest is to solve the problem of texting and driving. We invite high school students to submit an essay and win scholarship money. We got a donation from Pepsi, was it? CEO of Pepsi, yeah. The CEO from Pepsi. So we used CrowdRise for ours. We only raised $13,000, but we did attract a corporate sponsor because we were on CrowdWise. We weren't just doing peer-to-peer networking with our local Cleveland, Northeast Ohio contacts. So you can get lucky and find a corporate sponsor. Number two, increase your visibility from local to regional or from regional to national. Number three, fundraise efficiently by leveraging technology. Leverage is a bit of a buzzword, but it's an important word. The internet is making it easier for you to raise money if you just know how to do it. It's very easy if you just know how to do it. There's still legwork involved, and it's a lot of the traditional legwork that you would do for a normal fundraising campaign. It's not that you just throw something up on CrowdRise and all of a sudden you reach 1 million people and they all want to give you money. But it does help you leverage if you know how to do it. Number 4, assess and evaluate public interest. Learn what works and what doesn't work. This is a thought that I got from Pam Taros as well. In her experience working with clients, she has a marketing firm that helps nonprofits with crowdfunding and other types of activities. You can do well by jumping in with a small campaign, figuring out what works for your nonprofit. By small, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, and then see what works, what doesn't work, and then move on to a larger campaign where you're trying to raise 20 or 25 or 50 or 100. Last one is don't be left behind. And to explain that one, we have to go to the next slide. Here's a slide showing growth in venture capital and angel funding. Raise your hand if you know what angel funding is. Okay, great. Most of you do. So I looked this up last night because Erica was looking through, my wife Erica, who's here today, was looking through the slide deck, and she said, "What's angel funding?" And I thought, well, I can explain it, but I'll look it up. I wonder where it came from. The term actually comes, I mention this because there are a lot of music folks here, the term comes from Broadway. When people were trying to put on a show and they were, they needed an investor and one large investor to get them over the hump and get to the opening act. And that's where the term was coined, an angel investor, for musicals on Broadway and any kind of theater on Broadway. Anyway, so this is 2009 going all the way up to 2015. You can see that both the lines are going up. This is funding in billions. So these are both for-profit types of fundraising. Let's go to the next slide. Here's crowdfunding. From 2013 to 2015, that's a very steep line. That's a line that's not a trend. That's a market evolution. And I can't guarantee to you that this is all nonprofit. I think a good chunk of that is probably for-profit. I don't know how much, because the two tend to get blended. A portion of that is just personal cause, which isn't really 501c3. It's not exactly nonprofit. It's sort of nonprofit lowercase n, right? So, but there are a couple other things to note here. I mean, in addition to that line is extremely steep, and it will probably continue on that trajectory for a while. Notice that the other two lines aren't really going down. There's more money going into the market. And that's because we're reaching donors, or we're reaching people who aren't normally active in capital markets or in the nonprofit sector making donations. And that's a big, big deal. A couple other things to note. You see the angel line going down slightly. That's partly because some of those angel investors are actually going into crowdfunding and doing their investing through platforms. Angel investors are usually providing between $100,000 and $1 million, maybe $2 million to a startup company. That's sort of the space that they're operating in. So some of those are going into the crowdfunding. And you see the VC going up along with the crowdfunding. That's because the crowdfunding and the angel investors are giving the seed money to the startups to get to the point where the venture capitalists, eventually they get big enough, the venture capitalists are interested in doing something. You got to be at about $2 or $3, $4 million with your business before a venture capitalist has any interest in you. They don't want to bother with you when you're smaller than that. So just some of the things that are going on there in that slide. Here's another graph showing the growth. The biggest one here is lending. And a lot of that's probably partly real estate because they changed the securities laws 4 years ago to open up online fundraising for for-profit ventures as well. And real estate has just been ridiculous because that's how real estate's always been. But the next biggest one here is donations. And that's at $2.85 billion there. And that's a combination of 501c3 and personal cause, but still it's a big number. So how do you do a campaign? How do you run it so that it won't fail? I want to again thank Pam Taros because I spoke with her about marketing, how to make these things successful, to get her thoughts on this, and a lot of these ideas are from her. Start 3 months in advance. Giving Tuesday is coming up soon. This is a good time to start planning to maybe do a campaign on Giving Tuesday or sometime at the end of the year. Obviously, that's a good time to fundraise. You all know that. So you can start with only 2 months or 1 month left, but there is legwork to do. You can't just throw something up onto a crowdfunding platform and think, again, oh, well, I'll find a corporate sponsor or people will notice me because I'm on a platform. You still have to do the regular legwork you would do for a campaign reaching out, personally to folks, getting people lined up to donate at the front end of your campaign so that you have some momentum and you can attract some attention. When people see that a campaign has already raised, 20 or 30 or 40% within the first week or 2 weeks, which is what how a lot of crowdfunding campaigns work, then other people will jump in. And you'll tend to pull in most of your money at the first, 1/3 or maybe the first 2-3 weeks of your campaign, and then the last 1 or 2 weeks of your campaign, which, and it comes as no surprise to those of you who are involved in fundraising, it's not that much different from any other campaign, right? So storytelling, that's critical. The tone and the content of the message is very important. Focus on the donor and what they can accomplish, what you can accomplish with their donation. If you can be as specific as saying exactly what they're going to get, do that. You know that you could reach someone on a personal level and they will give money at a time when normally they wouldn't. Example, like if a music-related nonprofit called me and asked for a donation, I would of course listen. I would pay a lot more close attention if it was a nonprofit that called and said, we need a bass amp for our jazz band. I know how bad jazz bands sound when they don't have a good bass player and they don't have a good bass. You're going to have like a band full of kids that sound like Lawrence Welk and aren't playing in tune because they don't have a bass attuned to. So if somebody tells me, oh, well, we really need a bass amp, I'm more likely to pull my checkbook out and write a check than if they just call and say, hey, we need money for our operating fund, or we have a capital campaign going on, can you help us out? So that's a huge thing to make your campaign successful. And if you have multiple things, multiple ways you're serving the community, multiple pieces of equipment you need or services you want to provide, throw them all up there, see what attracts people and what they want to donate for. The second point under storytelling here is a related point. Don't focus on your organization and facts and figures. Past accomplishments, you're going to want to cite those at some level, but they won't be the most persuasive thing for you to use in your campaign, probably. It's more persuasive to say something emotional, get the donors to realize in a positive way that they can have a positive impact. That's how you want to create your message. Communication, also huge. Videos work extremely well. They don't need to be long. In fact, the shorter the better, probably. Who jumps on Facebook and watches a video that someone posts that's 10 minutes long? You don't do that. You turn it off after 90 seconds, and you don't need that much. You only need about 60 or 90 seconds to do it. Alex is giving me the high sign to keep going here. So choose a platform. Is it nonprofit friendly? The nonprofit focused platforms have incredible resources and services they provide to nonprofits to help them run their campaign. Since I'm running out of time, I want to go through a little faster here. Platform and processing fees. These work all different ways. The platform fee could be 5%, 3%, 8%, whatever it is. Could be 10%, which is really high. There will also be processing fees for credit card transactions. All the platforms work differently, and some of them have multiple plans, multiple options for alternatives for how you want to be billed. And some of them, this is going to make it sound complicated, but it's actually really awesome. CauseVox, I looked on their website a couple days ago, getting ready for this to see how their financing works. They have like 3 different tiers of sort of pricing, where you can pay $20 a month for 6 months or a year, and then pay a small percentage of the raise and get certain types of services. Then they have like 2 other packages that have like different numbers, different combinations. In addition to that, they have like add-on services. So if you want one package but it doesn't come with a certain service that you think you're going to need, you can add that service in, whether it's like phone support or training support, whatever it is. Really neat stuff they're doing for nonprofits to make it work no matter what the size of your nonprofit is. The websites are very easy to understand. CauseVox in particular, I would, if you're curious about how pricing works, I think they're a great example. Jump on there and see how they're pricing things, and you can use that, compare it to the other sites that you're considering and how they're pricing things and what the numbers are. There can be hidden fees too, so read the fine print. There are tons of smaller platforms that are not well known, and some of them are scams, and some of them are just not run very efficiently. They could have like hidden fees that will ding you and you won't be happy. So go ahead.
Can you identify what platform means?
Platform. So a platform, CrowdRise is an example of a platform. It's basically it's a website and a business that is operating to for example, for small nonprofits who maybe you don't even have a way on your page to take donations. If you're that type of nonprofit, a platform can be really useful to you because they handle that for you. The people who donate will donate through the platform. There'll be a web page they can click, they can say how much money they want to donate. So there's a whole IT infrastructure there for you. But in the nonprofit sector, there are also a bunch of support services. They have people who will get on the phone with you. Okay, so 2 days ago, I emailed CauseVox to ask them a question about peer-to-peer fundraising. I don't remember what the question was. I got an email back from them like instantly. It was more like an instant message thing, I guess, but answering my question and asking if I had follow-up. I got another email from them today where they sent me a link of, it was like 20 links of like tips for nonprofits running a crowdfunding campaign. Things about storytelling, things about timing, things about scheduling, things about like strategy, things about videos. So the support systems are incredible on these platforms. I won't go back to the slide, but Razoo is a nonprofit platform, that one of the larger ones. They've been around since 2006. They've raised $500 million since 2006. CauseVox is, I think, smaller. I couldn't find any stats on how large they are. Judging by their website, their staff looks pretty small. They probably aren't broadcasting exactly how much they've raised because they're smaller and they're afraid they'll pale in comparison next to people like Razoo. But it looks to be like an excellent website with really great services.
So you look up platform and you get a list, or how?
If you Googled crowdfunding platform or nonprofit crowdfunding platform, you'll pull up platforms and you'll pull up articles with lists of platforms. You'll pull up, here are the 7 best nonprofit crowdfunding platforms, in my opinion. It might be a little outdated, but it's very easy to find. So,
Okay. What would you say a fair percentage for opportunity cost that we'll be charging you is fair to see when using these platforms?
what's fair? For just a straight percentage, I think 3, 4, 5% I've seen. When it comes to adding in services and then paying sort of a monthly fee like CauseVox is doing, that's a lot tougher to say. That's probably why I suggested going on the website and taking a look. Because I think when this started, it was more like just percentages, and now it's a lot more jumbled up. There are websites out there that'll charge a lot more than that, and they won't be very upfront about it. And that's way too much to pay, in my opinion. Pam?
I just want to give a shout out to IOB too. Locally, they do some really great trainings around specifically what he's talking about. They focus on local campaigns. It's called IOB in your own backyard. They have some great trainings. They really teach you how to engage your network and plan your campaign. And they also have pulled in some funders in town who will match dollars for specific campaigns that meet a niche. So IOB and CauseVox are my two favorites.
Yeah, IOB is excellent. There's a list on your handout, at the bottom of your handout, and it'll be on the last slide up here, of some resources. IOB's website is on there. Pam's website is on there, and a few other websites. So I'm getting the high sign, and we still haven't gotten to legal issues. So let's get going, because there's one big one that's very important, and beyond that, I'm happy to report there isn't a whole lot to worry about in terms of legal obstacles. So here's the U.S. Does anyone remember what federalism is from your high school government class or college government or history class or social studies? Federalism is, we have two levels of laws, federal and state, and of course at the state level we have 50 different states and we have 50 sets of laws. This comes back to bite businesses, for-profit and nonprofit, in various ways. And in some ways, it's sort of the bane of an attorney's existence, having to deal with so many different state laws. For you guys, this is the one problem that comes up in crowdfunding and in any online fundraising. You're now in cyberspace. Now you are subject to the charitable solicitation registration requirements in every state if you go beyond actually, posting your crowdfunding page or getting onto the platform and take a few other steps, such as taking a donation from someone in another state, or doing some individual personal solicitation of someone in that state by email or phone or what have you. The fines, if you have not registered in a state, can vary greatly. In some cases, they can be imposed on a per offense basis. That's pretty unusual. I never heard of it happening, but in theory, it could happen. So this is the bad news. To register in every state, you have to pay between $100 and $200, depending on the state, per state to register, and you need to fill out a form. We'll talk more about that on the next slide here. So here are some workarounds for this problem. And this may be familiar to some of you if you're already fundraising, across the U.S. And you're subject to these requirements. Some of you are not subject to them, and I'll get to that in a minute as well. First, the Charleston Principles. So the National Association of State Charity Officials is trying to get all the states on board to have at least the same criteria for what does it mean that you've solicited in my state. So whether you're, if you're in Ohio and you're trying to reach people all over, go to Wisconsin, go to California, go to Oregon, if they all have the same standard for what does it mean to have solicited someone in their state, it makes life on you easier because you know when you should register and when you shouldn't register. So the concept is specifically targets persons in the state or receives contributions from persons in the state on a repeated and ongoing or substantial basis through or in response to website solicitations. So again, that's where when you just launch your campaign, the states aren't, another state is not going to come after you just for that. If you get to a point where you're taking a lot of donations from that state and they get wind of it, they might. Down to the Unified Registration Statement. This is another piece of solving the problem. The National Association of State Charity Officials is working with a lot of other agencies to put together this Unified Registration Statement, which basically means if you are subject to these laws and you want to raise in all 50 states, okay, now you need a staff member to sit down and fill out 50 different applications. But they don't exactly have to do that. The Unified Registration Statement makes life a little bit easier. It's not going to make the filings exactly the same in every state, but it's going to be a lot less painful because it's just one form to fill out. You still have the filing fees, like I said, $100 to $200, depending on the state. And here's one that you'll be relieved to hear. There are exceptions to the registration requirements. Educational institutions in most states are accepted. Hospitals in most states are accepted. So if you're sitting there looking at this thinking, Nate, you're crazy, I don't know what you're talking about, my agency doesn't do that, you might fall into one of those exceptions where you just don't need to do it. The idea there is that what the states are really trying to do is protect against fraud. They're trying to protect against small, so-called nonprofits and solicitors who are doing bad things. So they have exemptions that apply to really large organizations because they just don't really need to police those very much. That's why those folks get out of it, and then smaller and mid-sized nonprofits may not. Another big help here is de minimis requirements. So for example, Michigan, I'm not licensed in Michigan, but doing the research for this, it looks like Michigan has like a 10-person limit. So if you're under 10 in how many people you've solicited, they won't come after you. If every state had that, that would go a long way to solving problems for smaller and mid-sized nonprofits in dealing with this problem. So some other issues here, I'll go really quickly. Intellectual property and social media. When you're launching your crowdfunding campaign, you're going to be asking your staff to help by sharing things on Facebook, other social media. Be careful and get some approved content, content that you know is not going to get you in trouble in terms of intellectual property infringement or any other type of liability. Get it approved and give it to your staff and say, this is what you can post. You can't post anything else, because if they're out doing their own thing, they're trying to help, but they post something and they end up infringing on someone's IP, now you got a problem. And Facebook and other social media sites could come after you, as well as the people who feel that their IP was infringed. Go ahead.
What happens when your approved stuff is reposted by people who have a less specific relationship to your organization and think they're being helpful, how liable are you for their activities?
Well, that's a good question. If it's not infringing material, then it doesn't matter.
Well, they can always put their own little flavor on top of it and misconstrue what you are
Yeah, I mean,
intending.
that's a great question. Yeah, I don't know, from a technology standpoint, as a way to sort of lock things down so they can't add things to it. I mean, there's a point where, yeah, you can't really stop that from happening. But I think that's pretty rare. I mean, you have to kind of, you kind of have to go out of your way to infringe on someone's intellectual property. But I mean, it can happen. You know, people tend to see things on the internet. They think, oh, someone else did that, I can do it too. And they don't realize there are copyright and trademark laws that prevent you from doing things like that. So other issues here, commercial co-ventures. That's where, you know, Nike says if you buy X many of these shoes, or you buy a shoe, we'll donate to Susan G. Komen, whatever. So those types of transactions can be very helpful in raising funds, but you've got to have a contract, and it's got to have all the things that a contract ought to have. A term, termination provisions, pricing, the licensing provisions for trademarks, identification provisions, prior approvals of, you know, what are they going to do with your mark, with your content, what are you going to do with theirs, get all that stuff buttoned down. And then you can have IRS issues. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move on from there, but if you have questions about that, just grab me afterward. And we had someone ask about donor-directed gifts. I'll hit on that real quickly. The question in general was, how seriously do we need to take these, and what can happen if we run into a problem? And that's a tough question to answer. It's a long question to answer. But here's some, you know, high level and some practical things for you. Where are the requirements? Are they in trust documents, a letter, a gift agreement, memo line of a check, a napkin? They could be anywhere. And a donor who's angry or an attorney general who is irritated at something that you did could pick a fight with you over something very small. And you can write a contract on a napkin. I know it's the dumbest thing you ever heard. It could be enforceable in court. So wherever they put that restriction, they could write it in a letter, they could write it in an email, it could be anywhere, and they might have an understanding that's really important to them of how you're going to use their money, and if you aren't going to honor that, it could come back to bite you. So document those requirements internally once you've taken a gift in, and communicate them to your staff so that the money doesn't get spent in a way that it's improper. Have a covenant compliance record database and a review audit process. Smaller nonprofits, that's kind of a big ask, but it have something. You know, it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. At First Energy, we had a person who it was her full-time job, practically her full-time job, just to watch all the loan covenants in all of our 20 or 30 series of bonds that we'd issued over the last 30 years. Daunting task, but it's got to be done, because if you trip up one of those things, it can just lead to pretty big problems. So. Last thing here is the crowdfunding Bill of Rights. You can find this at the Nonprofit Times website. And nothing that's real news here. We have a lot of experienced fundraising and development people in the room. A lot of this is sort of common sense or review for you guys. Not necessarily specific to crowdfunding. It's not that much different from what you would do in a normal campaign. So. There's the list of resources. That's also at the bottom of your handout. And I think we're done. If you have questions, please grab me afterwards. I'm happy to talk.
Good stuff. Thank you. Nice job, man.